Okay? When we talk about who the ancient Egyptians were, there's consensus that Egypt has been invaded over half a dozen times. I haven't even included in this list the Ottoman invasion, I haven't included the French or the British invasion, that all came after this. But the Arab invasion in the 7th century of the Common Era, then the Vandals, which is where the word vandalism came from, because they was a bit mad, to use the technical term. That came in the 5th century. They are German people. Then the whole of North Africa, not just Egypt, was a Roman province. Before that, Greek, before that, Persian in 525 BC. At the most conservative estimate, ancient Egyptian history, pharaonic kingship, begins in 3100 BC. I say most conservative because I don't actually agree with that chronology, because my teacher, Robin Walker, big shout out to the OG, taught me that there's reasons to disagree with that chronology. But nonetheless, if we go with the most conservative estimate, can we see that the Persians still got to Egypt 2,500 years after the founding of ancient Egyptian kingship? So who was living in northeast Africa prior to all of these invasions from people that are not from Africa? Well, let's see. The ancient Greeks saw the ancient Egyptians for themselves. They were in Egypt during the Persian invasion, and of course, then when they ruled Egypt for a little while. Let's see what some of them had to say. Next slide, please. Diodorus of Sicily. General Histories, Book 3, 30 BC. Now the Ethiopians, for those who don't know, Ethiopian literally means of the burnt face. It wasn't an insulting term, it was a generic term for black person, yeah? Back in the day, and it referred to generally all of Africa, and even the Greeks used it to refer to parts of India. If you go to India today, in southern India, you'll find people, some people, as black as any people in Africa. So it shouldn't surprise you if that term was used, but it was a generic term meaning black. Now the Ethiopians, as historians relate, were the first of all men. The proofs of this statement, they say, are manifest. They also say the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Ethiopians. Now can you see, we're told modern science discovered that Africans were the first people on the planet. But here is an ancient Greek historian saying that Africans were already saying we were the first people on the planet in 30 BC. Herodotus, the father of history. There can be no doubt but that the Colchians are an Egyptian race. Before I heard any mention of the fact from others, I'd remarked it myself. My own conjectures were founded on the fact that they are black-skinned and have woolly hair, afro. Yeah? The Colchians, by the way, are a group of people in southern Russia at the time. Whole host of other Greek scholars, including Aristotle, and there's loads more I could have put, seem very unconfused about the ancient Egyptians' ethnicity. We can't have it both ways. Either the ancient Greeks were one of the most intelligent, civilized people ever, or they were so stupid they couldn't recognize the colors of people they saw for their own eyes. But we can't have it both ways, you see? Next slide. Now, here are some Egyptologists. It's important for us to understand the way early Egyptology evolved. When the French came to Egypt and colonized Egypt, it was in the height of transatlantic slavery, late 1700s, Napoleonic expedition to Egypt. The Sphinx, the pyramids, all of these things are newly rediscovered. And immediately the French are like, uh-oh, we've got a bit of a problem here, because we have an economy based on the pseudoscientific idea of racism, based on the idea that some races, namely the white race, an invention, is superior to other races, particularly the black. And the discovery of an ancient African civilization, thousands of years before there was anything of comparable stature in France or England, not an insult, just a fact of history, created some problems. Now, some scholars immediately reacted to this by saying, okay, well, clearly racism's nonsense. Hooray, we can do away with such a stupid idea. Of course, foreign policy realized this wasn't terribly convenient if your economy depends on racialized slavery. So even though some honest scholars came out and told the truth, many scholars went against this, and you're going to see how ridiculous some of the explanations got. Champollion, not the main Champollion, but the brother of Francois Champollion, had the following to say. I'm not going to read it all, but if you look closely, he says that Volney's basically chatting rubbish. There's no way the ancient Egyptians could have been black. But let's get to the end, and this is how funny it is. Listen to this part. Volney invokes that of Herodotus, who recalls that the Colchians had black skin and woolly hair. Yet these two physical qualities, black skin and afro hair, do not suffice to characterize the Negro race, and Volney's conclusion as to the Negro origin of the Egyptians is evidently forced and inadmissible. Now, he didn't offer any evidence. All he said was having black skin and woolly hair doesn't make you black. And if we go back into the racial science of the day, you will understand that it was actually argued by otherwise intelligent people that there were two races of black people. There were Negroes and there were Hamites. Hamites were any Africans that didn't look absolutely stereotypically what we think of West African people to supposedly look like. Anyone that has a slightly thin nose or any kind of straight hair or any features randomly that we decide was a Hamite. And Hamites were responsible for all of the civilization in Africa, and they descended from Europeans. Negroes, on the other hand, they were the real black people. And even when we find evidence of Negroes, we'll just say they were Hamites, as you have here. This is how silly and how ridiculous ideas, pseudo-scientific ideas like race, make otherwise intelligent people behave. Next slide, please. This is one particular comment, one of my favorite. He said, "There are a people now forgotten, discovered, while others were yet barbarians, the elements of the arts and sciences, a race of men," now, of course, like most sexist men, he used men, but he meant all humans, because we just normalize that kind of language, men to represent all of humanity, "now rejected from society for their sable skin and frizzled hair, founded on the study of the laws of nature, those civil and religious systems which still govern the universe." Again, two early Egyptologists saying very much the same thing. Egyptian civilization is not Asiatic, but African in origin, of Negro origin. However paradoxical this may seem, we are not accustomed, in fact, to endow the black or related races with too much intelligence. So Professor Abiy Amelou straight away hit on what the issue was. Francois Champollion, the founding father of Egyptology, the man who decoded the Rosetta Stone, what did he have to say? Because apparently, according to National Geographic, the only people that think the ancient Egyptians were black were crazy Afrocentric black people. But let's see. The Egyptians belong to a race quite similar to the Kenuas, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, or Barbarous, present inhabitants of Nubia, Sudan. In the present Copts of Egypt, we do not find any of the characteristic features of the ancient Egyptian population. The Copts are the result of crossbreeding. Seems normal when a country gets invaded, there's interbreeding. The people that live in America today are not representative of the ancient indigenous Americans for the most part. Even though those people still live there, the average citizen of New York does not look like the average American 500 years ago. With all the nations that successively dominated Egypt, i.e. the Greeks and Romans, it is wrong to seek in them the principal features of the old race. And I could go on ad infinitum of Egyptologist after Egyptologist who, even if they felt compelled to racially abuse the ancient Egyptians, which many of them did, some of the art historians talk about how can you ever say their carvings are nice when they're so obviously Negro. Many of them, scores of them, are like, well, obviously they were black, that's why they were uncivilized. So Egyptologists were presented with this real problem. Either ancient Egypt was civilized and European, or uncivilized and African. And very few of them acknowledged that it was both highly civilized, highly technically advanced, and also African, but a few of them did. I'm not going to come here and pretend to you that it was a feminist paradise, but what we do know is there were 5 female pharaohs, women could inherit and bequeath property, and of course we had female physicians. Medical specialization, shipbuilding and expeditions, copious amounts of literature in poetry and prose has survived. There is 3 great volumes of ancient Egyptian literature published by a scholar called Mary Lichtenheim. I suggest you look them up, in addition to the coffin texts and the pyramid texts and others. Next slide, please.